Michael says, to me, networking, aka drinking with smarter people, is the most valuable part of the conference.
Because it makes them dumber and it makes you feel smarter. Usually how it goes.
Well, if you like the hallway track, so we jokingly call, I don't know if I heard that term from Richie or who I heard that from, but the hallway track is just basically people walking around talking to each other about their problems. Then to some extent, it doesn't really matter what's up on the slides. And I'm kind of torn too. I want to go through all the slides and kind of look at, or all the summit sessions and go, is there one good session per time slot that I want to attend? And really, to me, one is enough. In the past, there's been years where I look at time slots and I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to see any of these. So maybe, and I haven't looked at the 2017 lineup yet, maybe there is enough as they start to publish schedules that I'll be happy with. And there's a huge value to that hallway track. But even if you want to just do the hallway track, you don't have to go to the conference. You can just be in Seattle that week and you can hang out at the bars and restaurants. Everybody publishes, where they're going, and you can meet a lot of amazing people.
Right. The couple of years I did pay for the summit, like out of my own pocket, I did mostly hallway track. And, because that was the value for me, was meeting the people there at, all in one spot. That's kind of where I kind of wanted to do, as opposed to, because I could do the sessions offline and whatnot. But if it's on someone else's dime, you're kind of like, well, I got to kind of come out of this with some sort of knowledge. You kind of feel like you have to at least learn something, as opposed to, oh, but I talked to Buck Woody and I had this, and and doing all that. You can't really come back to your manager and say all that stuff, and it's like, and what did you learn for the company? Like, not much.
Yeah. I tell DBAs, when you're arguing for, or really anybody who wants to go to a conference, when you're arguing for part of the training budget, what you do is sit down with your boss and go, all right, well, what are the problems that you would want me to be able to solve when I get back? Then you go through and make a list of, say, 2 or 3 sessions a day that you have to go to in order to accomplish those goals. Then the rest of the time, you're really well suited to go head out in the hallway track and go meet people. That's how I met Jeremiah. We were just hanging out in the hallway one time at PAST. And then Dr. It's going to kill me not remembering what his name was. He used to be a keynote speaker, not DeWitt, but another doctor who did the BI thing and went to, the hell's the name of that BI company? We used to do all these really amazing analytics talks. And he was just walking by in the hallway, and we were like, hey, what kinds of things are you doing that are interesting? He sat down on the floor with us and started showing us how he was analyzing the survivors of the Titanic based on what deck they were on and where they were at in the ship. I was like, that was a cool moment that I never would have had if I wasn't just open to seeing whatever. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so we should probably take some technical questions here. Folks, if you want to ask your technical questions, go ahead and ask them over in the questions pane of GoToWebinar. We'll start working through these first come, first serve. Christopher says, 2,500 SQL servers, and I'm growing at about 10 per week. That's kind of like my savings account right there. That I'm managing, and if I have to monitor 2,500 SQL servers, what performance statistics would you look at in order to find the really big problems that I would have to fix right now? He says the schema across all these instances is the same. It's just that the amount of data varies. Wow, that's an interesting question.
That's a lot of servers. How big is the team?
It is. I was going to ask the same thing. Yeah.
Because I've worked at a company where there were, I think it was 5 local DBAs and we had 3 offshore DBAs, 8 of us, and there were about 700 servers, I think. So, I imagine that these 2,500 servers are small, maybe they're virtual machines, since it sounds like it's the same database, across each of these systems. But that's still a lot of servers, a lot of patching you have to do. Maybe they're not patching though. But I'd want to know about just the generics of, CPU utilization, job failures. Just the normal set of monitoring stuff and just making sure that all that stuff is going to the team.
Oh man, he has his follow-up. He says the dev team is 30 people. There's only 1 DBA. But he says I'm more of a he says I'm more of a developer.
Wow. 1 real DBA.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
That means
I
they don't
hope
even
you-
have time to work on any of this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, you can start monitoring it, but who's going to work on the alerts?
How do you even deploy performance monitoring across 2,400, 2,500 servers when you only have one full-time DBA?
You're going to need some free
So
stuff
what-
for sure.
That's true. Oh, yeah. I don't even know that I would want alerts off of 2,500 servers. I've only got 30, developers. That's pretty tough. Oh man, what would I collect? I would collect wait time per hour, but I don't know that I would go any deeper than that, because in terms of urgency, the amount of data you're going to get is going to be staggeringly tough to slice and dice. Anything else that I would gather? Really, I would just go for wait time per hour. And then you said whichever servers are having the worst wait time per hour, and then go tackle those servers. But the amount of data that you would have to collect, even just building a database to house that across 2,500 servers, is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I'd probably want to get really clear priorities for which servers I need to focus on from management, and that's probably going to just be based on how much money is coming in from certain people every month. So I'd probably just want to get like the top 3 or 5 servers from my boss that they want me to focus on those, and then see if any of the performance things can trickle down to other servers in the environment. For just for example. If you find some really slam dunk missing indexes on your top 3 to 5 servers, it's totally possible that when you go and you start looking at your other servers, those missing indexes, if they're not usable now, will be down in the future. So I'd probably want to get some priorities and then tune my priorities and then see what would apply to the rest of the environment. Because it's a lot easier to collect data from, analyze, and then make meaningful changes on a handful of servers than it is to do it across all of them. So you want to do it and test it where it matters, and then deploy across the rest where it would count.
Let's see. Next up, we have Steve asks, are there performance penalties when I query the local server using a linked server via a DNS CNAME alias? Oh, sweet Jesus, please tell me you're not doing this. There's 2 parts to this. Are you querying a different server via linked servers, or are you querying the same server via a linked server? Like, are you doing a linked server out to yourself and coming back? If you can follow up with that, we'll be able to give you a better answer there. Let's see. JH says, which DML statement would be faster? If I do something with parameter values, or do I do it hard-coded as batches like strings?
I don't understand the question. What is meant by hard-coded versus parameter values?
I bet you he's doing strings of like insert into or update into, and he's just doing a list of values, or if he's doing parameters. You can run into parameter sniffing. I'm thinking specifically of update statements. You could run into parameter sniffing hitting update statements. But if you want, paste in a couple of examples, and we may be able to tell you more details. Let's see here. Anupinder asks, for performance of queries that do joins across multiple databases on the same server, are they any slower, or is there anything extra that I have to look at?
I mean, if it's on the same server, it's just the normal stuff. Just look at the execution plan and see what's going on there. What is the query waiting on also?
Is it any worse than, say, if I say 4 tables across 4 databases, is it any worse than 4 tables in the same database?
I haven't seen any performance difference between that, but maybe I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be
stretching
about the usual stuff like volume of data. If I have my indexes lined up for the query that I'm running, all that stuff. Look for blocking across databases. That might be a little bit tougher that might be a little bit more challenging to knock out. Because imagine if a join is blocked in one database but not in all the other ones. What's SQL going to be up to?
Oh. Steve comes back with a clarification, and I'm so sorry to report this answer. He says he's doing a linked server from self to self. So
sucks to be you.
Oh, dude. So, all right. So the problems, and I'm probably going to miss some of the problems, but I'm going to say one, and I'll let you guys know any others. Here's the big ugly part. Whenever you're doing linked server queries out, those results are not going to be cached. Or not even just the results. The raw data pages aren't going to be cached. Every time SQL Server is going to be like, whoa, I got to go do a linked server query. Who knows what happens over on the other side? SQL Server can even make dumb decisions about predicate push down. It may bring back table results across the linked server and then do the joins to tables. So if at any possibility, I would go try to run them without the double linked server and go see what happens, see if you get a performance difference there. I've seen a couple of cases where it was staggering, like SQL Server was dumping a bunch of stuff into TempDB because it didn't have enough RAM to cache all these tables that it was bringing back from the linked server. Any other things that I would worry about there? Distributed transactions would suck. Anything else I would worry about?
I'm just still so puzzled by the concept of it and how this is the vendor's big idea for high availability that I can't. I'm like performance hasn't even hit my mind yet. I'm just.
I know. What article did they read that they thought this was a good idea and it would solve
I just want to see that whiteboarding session. It's like no. We'll query the server from itself to itself using a like. That's like just like brushing your teeth with your weak hand. Like what?
The one that I saw once, that a vendor that was telling me about this, he was like, look, we just have one linked server for production, we have another linked server for dev, and another for QA. But sometimes they're on the same server, sometimes they're on different database servers. And I'm like, no, God, no. Let's see. Graham says, we have an instance that's all 1,000 batch requests a second. He says, my expensive queries are always updates and inserts, but my biggest wait type is async IO completion. What does async IO completion mean?
That's tied into backups a lot.
Backups and it keeps coming up on systems that on client systems, and so I've been saying this is the full backups or possibly differential backups. It doesn't apply to the transaction log backups, but I suspect, it's also checkpoints, and I think that the checkpoints are notable on these client systems. So in the past, I've said, this is probably your backups. Your backup throughput's not the greatest, but when their backup throughput is fine, I think they are experiencing an I/O issue, even though the other I/O wait stats aren't as significant. But I think it's the checkpoints. You're writing the dirty pages to disk.
I've never seen those tied in together, but that'd be interesting if it did. Because for async IO completion, it's always just like from the start of a backup to the end of a backup, you're accruing that wait.
Right, so, but the number of average waiting time on it doesn't reflect the backup job time. So that's why I've been confused on it. And so I've looked up at Paul Randall's async IO completion article, and he mentions checkpoints in there.
Oh.
So yeah. So I think that there might be. I wish that these wait sets wouldn't have multiple meanings. Separate them out. Separate checkpoints out from backups.
JH says, does AWS SQL Server have any extra fees, like the amount of data that gets queried, high availability clustering, or all these fees up front with licensing? So there's licensing is one part of it. You can either bring your own licensing, or you can pay Amazon by the hour, or longer term if you do reserved instances. There are the normal Amazon and all cloud providers have egress fees for networking, like how much data you pull out of the server. Generally, in terms of queries, that's not a big deal. But if you do backups every day and you pull those backups out of SQL Server and put them somewhere else, like on premises or in another cloud, you can run into egress charges if you do enough of that. Tim says, I've got an ERP update that times out updating a table. Whenever I rebuild my indexes, all of a sudden these updates no longer time out. Could this be an issue with statistics?
Statistics, or just putting those indexes back, you're getting to get a different execution plan, so it could just be a bad plan to cache too. Do people still, when loading data, do you still, is it common to still drop all the indexes, load the data in, and then create the indexes again?
I've seen it happen in a couple.
Because back in the day, that's what we did.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's common anymore.
Well, whenever I've had to do it, rather than go through all that, I would always, just have a staging table so that I could get my fancy minimal logging and all that other garbage, dump data in as fast as I could, then, put it out to my prod tables in batches so that I didn't have to drop all my indexes and all that other stuff.
Yeah, and I guess it depends how much data you're loading, right? I mean, if we're loading a gigabyte of data, I may want to drop the indexes. I don't know.
So one thing that I would be curious about is prior to SQL Server 2014, SQL would have a whole lot of trouble with execution plans if there were ascending keys involved. So if your update is only, say, hitting the most recent chunk of data and you haven't hit a statistics update threshold yet and it's an ascending key, well, you could run into some performance trouble in that regard. And then the index rebuild would update stats with the full scan. You would have that ascending key information in the histogram now, and that might do it.
Tim asks, what licensing model do the Blitz scripts use? We use the MIT license, which kind of means you can do anything with it that you want as long as you retain the copyright notice inside the script. Like if you go hand it out to other people or you change it, you just need to include the copyright notice, but you can charge for it. You can give it to strangers on the street, whatever. And then do you retain any rights to pull back data, even aggregated, for the servers that it's on? Because it's the MIT license, that doesn't say anything about what we could do with the data. However, all the SP Blitz scripts are just plain T-SQL that send results back to you. So they don't do inserts over the internet or push stuff back to us in any way, shape, or form. We did used to, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we had a Windows app that could have been able to do that. It didn't. But just in terms of any time you run a Windows app, you want to know where the data's going.
What's really funny is when I first started working here, there was a conversation about the Windows app, and I went looking, I Googled something, and someone had uploaded a PDF of the findings from the Windows app to a website, and it was searchable. And so I click on it, and I'm looking, and I'm like, someone put this miserable SP Blitz output online, and it was searchable. You could find it searching some of the Blitz text. I was like, holy cow, someone did that. I thought I was the only one who ever downloaded the app.
Oh, what I've learned over time is if you give people an easy way to share stuff, they will do it. They will, one way or another. Here's my social security number. Can someone tell me how to fix my credit? They will do it. Brandon says, when you guys let apps or clients connect to a SQL server, would you rather have them connect to just the server's name, or would you rather connect a DNS name or a SQL alias, and why?
So having done some desktop support in the past, and anytime the server name changes, it's painful to have updated all those connection strings out there in the world. So I'm a big fan of using DNS aliases. And if you're not using some kind of fancy feature like, database mirroring or availability groups, which has the ability to point to, availability, which can point to a listener name. But if you're not using stuff like that, I like the DNS names. I have used SQL aliases, but that has to get deployed to every single machine. It's not just on the SQL server. That's every single place that has to connect. You can deploy that easily. It's just a registry file. You can deploy it easily via some kind of login script, and I've done that in the past. But a DNS alias, I think, is the best solution, if not using something like the availability group listener.
As someone who's had to play around with group policy before to push out SQL alias, Dan says, when you have an SSRS report, and this really could be for any report, would you rather have the data be fetched from a stored procedure or a query built into the SSRS report?
I prefer store procedures, because if you have to make a change, you could just modify the store procedure. You don't have to go and fix the report, the application, or whatever. I've had situations where there was a little tiny bug in the code, and it required a full release to get this thing deployed to production. Whereas if it's in a store procedure, I can just go fix that real quick. And yeah, I'm going to do change control and all that stuff, but it's so much simpler. I mean, there's benefits to using store procedures besides that, but I don't like throwing the queries into the report.
Okay. Let's see here. Mark says, why would you not create a primary key on a table? He says, I've got tables with 100 million more rows, and they've got a unique clustered index, but they didn't create a primary key. Why wouldn't you create one?
So I had a client, this is a few months ago, that it's a vendor application and there were absolutely no primary keys anywhere. And they needed to move their data to other systems. And so they could not use transactional replication because transactional replication required primary keys. So they were using, I think this client was using peer-to-peer replication or some other SQL Server replication that did not require primary keys. Now they did have the unique indexes and unique clustered indexes, but I mean, I like constraints because they're meaningful and they tell you about the data. Whereas a unique index, yeah, this portion of the data is unique, but that doesn't mean that is the actual constraining uniqueness of that row.
I mean, I think the only time I wouldn't put a PK on there is like if it's a loading table or something like that. Even if it's a surrogate key, I would most likely put it on there. Not even 99 times out of 100, 999 times out of 1,000, the primary key is going to go on that production table unless it's some sort of loading table, which are probably in a different database, as it were.
I've heard people say, like, I just don't want to enforce referential integrity in the database. I believe it's going to slow me down. So I've heard people say that. I don't agree with it, but I've just heard people say it.
And it's always developers that say it.
There's this thing called indexing people that you could put onto those keys that kind of speed things up a little bit. I've heard it. It's a thing now, I guess. I don't know.
So speaking of things now, Nick asks, is there a best ORM out there? Or are they all pretty much the same?
Tara, go on. Answer, Tara.
I don't care what tool people use. I'm coming from the perspective of fighting fires in production. I just want things to perform well and not waking me up at 3 a.m, or so that I can do proactive administration and not have to constantly be working on production problems. And a lot of times production problems are performance-based, and I've had a lot of bad experiences with performance problems that were due to ORM. So I do have a blog post out there that's got a bunch of activity on it. I don't remember what the title is, but it basically is why I don't like ORMs. And it's not really about the ORM. It's about the performance problems that they cause. I don't care what tools you use. Just don't cause performance problems.
Yeah, and I'm the opposite side of that. I kind of like ORMs. I kind of like them a lot. So I don't think there's really a best one out there. It's just a tool that you and your team feels most comfortable with. I've been on teams that have just gone straight stored procedures, and it's thousands of line of code written by developers, and you could see how fast that's probably going to run. And we go to an ORM like Entity Framework, and things get a lot faster. Now, you'll run into a lot of issues because the team doesn't, or the individual doesn't understand what the ORM does on the back end and how it creates the queries, and doesn't even look at the queries on the back end. So when you get to more complex stuff, there's not a lot of thought there. It's like, oh, it works in dev, and you throw in a production with all the production data, and it just starts slowing everything down. The best thing you could do for any tool that you have is understand that tool. And I understand that it's hard for us developers because we have lots and lots of tools that do lots of different things. But if you don't have that understanding, an ORM is going to be bad for you because you're going to put it in situations that are not the best situations for the tool for the ORM.
Yeah, when it comes to stuff like that, where I don't have a vast, or deep knowledge of what each and every tool is like best or worst at, I would just want to ask 2 questions. What are most people doing, and what are most people who are doing what you're doing using? So that's how I would at least narrow product choice down. I mean, Richie, can you think of an ORM outside of Entity Framework that's really competitive with Entity Framework?
Yeah, Hibernate. And Hibernate's been around forever.
Yeah. Okay. So what else? Like, are there any, like, if you had to name like a top 3 or 5.
So
ORMs,
now you're going to micro ORMs like Dapper and
okay.
There's a ton of them. So what happens that people, like their developers say Entity Framework sucks. And so I'm going to go create my own flavor of Entity Framework, which is just going to do a small little thing of, it doesn't do everything Entity Framework does, but it just does this little thing, and it does it really super well. And that's how you get all these little ORMs going on all over the place, is that everyone has their own little take on it, and now all this stuff is blown up, and it kind of just, everybody just has their own simple version, and yet mine's the best, mine's the best, mine's the best, and it's where you get these developer wars going on, which I particularly hate. There's no need.
It's because Richie doesn't like conflict. All right, JH.
Yeah, me. Yeah, that's me, all right. I'm here with my hand on the, detonate button right now,
He doesn't like conflict or developers, so it's just a weird pacifist line that he has.
I want to kill myself, essentially, at every given time. Yeah, it's just...
JH asks a really interesting question. Do you have any suggestions on how to prevent developers from connecting in with the app's logins accounts into production servers?
I've struggled with that, and for me the answer is, why do the developers have that user ID and password? Isn't there another team that has the production access that developers don't usually at least in my environments, developers did not get to see the connection strings in production. They could see it in other environments, but at my last job, or a couple jobs ago, they were talking about having some kind of encrypted application that we would control. That we would be able to put the whatever password we had selected when we created the account, and then that it would be encrypted. So even if developers had access to be able to look at the web config or whatever file it was, they couldn't read the value and use it.
Yeah, and there's a setting in if you're using C# and Windows, whether web config or app.config or whatever, if you're using .NET, you can encrypt those encryption strings, so nobody can see them, and it's actually really easy to do inside the application to encrypt it.
Now, last question that we'll take, and this one's kind of tricky. This is from Graham, and Graham, we may not be the right people to answer it, but we'll give it a shot. What's the biggest hurdle, issue, or problem that you all faced when becoming consultants? Do you have any tips on how to get plugged into the SQL Server consulting community? I know blogging helps, but what else? Richie, you went off on your own.
No, never mind.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, Richie, you went off on your own, did the consulting thing for a while. What kind of things did you see people going off and doing to get into the consulting business?
I saw a lot of people struggling, like myself. I think that's it's a grind, right? I mean, it's a hard thing to do, so much so that I went and got a full-time job because there's a lot of it that I just didn't like. So the marketing, and it's a constant getting yourself out there, going to different conferences and meeting different people, meeting right people, getting people to say yes. A lot of soft skills involved in that. The stuff that Brent does really, really well, I don't do well at all. So, hey, now you know why I'm working for him. That's just kind of the way that works.
Yeah, I did. The hardest part by far is getting the business, is getting enough business to keep yourself busy. And it's this weird cycle where if you don't do enough of the marketing, then you don't bring enough business in. And so people will go off and they'll get a 40-hour-a-week contract. It'll last for 3 months, but when the contract's over, there's no business coming in if you weren't, building up that funnel leading up to it. So yeah, you nailed it, Graham, with blogging. Anything blogging, presenting, writing, doing guest posts for vendors, webcasts for vendors. You've got to be out continuously beating the drum going, here's what I'm good at. When you need help with this, call me. If you don't love doing that, and if you can't do it at least 8 to 16 hours a week, go work for a consulting company. It's so easy to go to join a consulting company where, say like ours, we've got me who does some of the marketing stuff to bring business in and some of the sales stuff in, but then you don't have the pressure of how do I bring business in. Now, it is really, really terrifying to try to build business in.
Yeah, I would even say it's more than just the 16 hours, right? I mean, I was pouring, it was almost like a second job to me, coming home and, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm still cranking out, podcasts and, practicing, presentations and, trying to avoid writing. I mean, that was kind of the norm for 3.5 years. Unlike Brent, my 40-hour week client didn't last 3 months. It actually lasted 3 years. So that kind of helped prolong it a bit, but I still had real trouble getting people into that funnel.
I was going to say, beyond marketing, I mean, just establishing a reputation has to be tough. Or like, a trustworthy brand and reputation has to be tough. You could really establish any kind of reputation you want, but having it be a good one to bring in business is a completely different set of
Even if you have a bad reputation,
Having one where people...
I mean, the weird world.
For me. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out with us this week at Adios, everybody.
Goodbye.
Hi.